find it really interesting. As you guys were speaking, when you're thinking about, okay, how do we make this really practical? How do we scaffold this for anyone who's listening and wants to improve how they structure their talk? Are we in the scenario where when we're training pupils, like when the problem difficulty is high and the mathematical difficulty is low, is that the same kind of situation? Or if we have the task that's not really that challenging and not that really engaging on a cognitive level, will the pupils buy in less? I don't know if I found the answer in my head as I was listening to you, but I'm thinking, okay, do we make these structured talks things that everyone can access and then go from there? Or does there need to be a certain level of cognitive demand that we include in these for pupils to buy in on a realistic level? Because obviously we don't want them to just sort of phone it in, so to speak.
I was going to add to that actually, Kieran, because that was what I was thinking as well. as we were talking, I was kind of thinking to myself, does this rely on children having enough knowledge, having enough competency with what they're doing? And then when we think of deficit between potentially children who may not receive or may not, or maybe coming from more disadvantaged backgrounds, not having as wide a vocabulary, as wide a knowledge base as other children. So I guess I'm sort of angling towards that question of when is the right time to do it, and I guess that comes back to professional judgment around when you sort of you structure that policy for them, because that has to play in, doesn't it?
I think there's a bare minimum of challenge that's required for partner talk or any activity really to be engaging. And I know that's almost a dirty word in education, but to literally make children go, well, this is something worth doing. There's a purpose to this. And that links back to what we were talking about earlier about something being planned and purposeful. I think alongside what Kieran's saying there, though, I definitely think it's the case that if I were looking to stretch children in what I wanted them to do with the talk, and I were looking perhaps for the first time for a kind of partner talk that might lead to a really structured answer where they might expand on something, talk for 3 or 4 sentences, relative, like kind of quite far down the school, it's probably going to be the case that the cognitive demand of what I'm asking them to talk about is a little bit lower because it's something that they're really familiar with or they're beginning to master. A really good example of that, or I like to think anyway, I remember a few years back I taught The Invention of Hugo Cabret with a bunch of year 5s, and this was a class where I'd struggled with partner talk, and it was something that they had worked on it in previous year groups, etc., but it just wasn't something that was a strength of theirs. And what we did with each chapter of the book was retell the story from the beginning using a text map. And by the time we got to, say, chapter 9 or 10, they had retold in their own words and heard a partner retelling chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, etc. And it was the way I did it was that there was this kind of rally back and forth. And whenever I said, okay, and switch, the other partner would take over carrying on the story. But the key point about this was that by the time they had got to kind of chapter 9, 10, etc., all of them, even the most reluctant of speakers, were quite confident in what they were doing. And some of the sentences that I heard them using to talk through the book and what happened, the plot summaries, were really great to hear. And I think in certain cases, having that in the back of our minds, thinking, okay, this is going to be quite a complex thing that I want children to do in their partner talk. So I'm going to make sure it's something that they're quite confident with, something they're quite familiar with, is perhaps a relatively sensible way of doing things. And equally, the other end of things, if something's particularly cognitively demanding just to kind of think through, then it might not be the time to introduce a bit of or a strategy in partner talk that they're not particularly familiar with.